Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me again tonight. Joining us for another episode of Meant for More with me, Sarah Allie Moore. And what we like to have are conversations that explore that not enough story and how we can dismantle the not enough story that we're carrying inside of ourselves and inspire you to claim your light and step into your greatness and your power because you are meant for more. And tonight, what we're going to be talking about and diving into is this topic around our wounds, our pain, our trauma. And that is, independently, personally, our own story of our own wounds. And then also the shared wounds that we have, with those around us. And so we're going to explore these different facets of trauma, and really what we want to dive into and explore is the healing balm, the wisdom that is carried in our pain, that has a lot of information for us on how we can really move into a place of healing, a space of healing, and invite us into, deeper purpose and a genuine connection to your true self. I don't know about you, but I've heard several conversations as of late around the subject of authenticity and discovering your true self. And what I know first and foremost is that the path to your true self always starts with exploring those pain points in our life, because they were never meant to be cast into the shadow, but rather brought into the light and carried with us, because they really craft and are a part of the powerful beings that we are. So I have Reverend Michelle Scavetta with me tonight, and I'm so excited, you guys, to be able to talk with her around this topic. And if you are a member of Mile High Church and you're joining us tonight, hi, Kathy, love you too. And you're joining us tonight, you know how inspirational Reverend Michelle Scavetta can be. And you know what I love about Reverend Michelle is that she's so open-hearted, vulnerable, honest, and she has a lot of deep insight and wisdom to share. And so I just know she's the perfect person to rise to this moment and dive into this conversation around trauma. So I'm going to invite Reverend Michelle in.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi, how are you tonight?
Oh my goodness, I'm so good. It's so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
So
I'm
exciting.
so glad. Yes, I'm so glad to have you. Would you introduce yourself to people who, for those of us who don't know you, for the listeners out there?
Sure. I'm Michelle Scavetta. I have my undergrad in contemplative psychology from Naropa up in Boulder, and I have my graduate degree from Holmes Institute. So I'm a minister at Mile High Church. I'm an assistant minister, and I'm in my third year of ministry. And I've been on staff at Mile High for almost 16 years. And so I have a bit of experience with serving and supporting people in awakening to their highest potential, their truest expression of who they came here to be.
Oh, I love that. Yes. And so we had this really awesome conversation where we just kind of explored and around this subject. And I think what's impactful is the ways that you spoke so open and honestly about your story around trauma, that I so many parallels, so many things that I could relate to in the experience of. When it comes to trauma, how would you define what trauma is?
It's interesting. I mean, I think trauma is basically an emotional response to a challenging incident or experience in one's life. But the thing about trauma is two people can experience the same exact situation,
Mm-hmm.
but have a different emotional response to it. One person might have a trauma response to it, whereas the other person can just continue, moving on with their life without much of an impact. And so I feel like trauma it's a personal response based on your past history, based on possibly family history, based on your support system and circumstances in your life. So it's, any challenging event. And I think oftentimes trauma can, it impacts your sense of safety.
Yes.
And it impacts your, perhaps you feel that and have an experience of feeling powerless in the situation. So I think all of those things factor into a person's experience of trauma.
Yeah. I was watching this documentary the other night, and I feel like this is sort of the synchronistic thing that happens is I'm about to talk about trauma with Reverend Michelle, and I get invited to a movie night, and I have no idea. I wasn't paying attention to what it was we were watching. I'm like, yeah, great, let's have a movie night. So I'm going over to my friend's house. And so then I'm like, okay, great. We're getting all nestled in. And it's like, what movie are we watching? And it's called The Wisdom of Trauma. I just died laughing. But it's a great documentary. I highly recommend everyone to check it out. You can, I would just Google it online. It's with Dr. Gabor Mate, I think is his last name. But he defines trauma is what happens inside of you because of what happened to you. And I was like, man, if that isn't the most simple but accurate way to talk about trauma. And you're exactly right. In the way that it manifests or it expresses itself, it's so different for every person, and it's because of those trauma responses, those responses to fear. Now, when we were talking about or exploring the trauma responses, there's I would love to talk about what comes up when we're facing a trauma response or we've gone through a trauma response, and the shame that comes up, right? When we respond to something and the judgments that we carry, and maybe how we can rewrite that shame story around not showing up the right way or in a more powerful way or whatever way we think we should, right? And how we can be empowered with how we responded in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, there's so much packed into that one statement.
Yeah.
So I think one of the key things to keep in mind when we experience a trauma response, so we can experience a trauma response immediately following an event, during an event, but also we can be triggered and have a trauma response years later. And so I think one of the key pieces is to remember, to the best of our ability, to be gentle with ourselves when we're having that response.
Yeah.
Because what it does is it throws us into our, reptilian brain, and we shift into oftentimes this fight or flight response or possibly a freeze response. And so when that happens, our goal, we want to bring ourselves back to the now moment, because oftentimes we get thrown back into the memory of the original experience, and all sorts of signals are going off in our body, and we have to remember that in this moment, we're safe, and to be able to calm our nervous system down so that we can just come back to the present moment. And the shame piece, oh my gosh, it is so common, especially for those of us who may have done many, many, many years of healing work, and we still have something that shows up, and it's like, what the heck? Why is this still showing up? I thought I was over it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure that's possible, but but I think with the shame response is we have to be able to catch it. We have to be able to witness, be aware of that talk, that self-talk.
Yeah.
And then just pause. It's like, okay, is that really the truth? Or what is the truth of me in this moment?
Yes.
so it's a lot of work, and it requires a lot of you know, thought, in the moment, a lot of variables, but the key piece is to be gentle with ourselves, and to just take it, one moment at a time. And for me, one of my, key tools is taking deep breaths. When I'm able to take, 3 deep breaths, it helps ground me. And then it helps my nervous system, settle down a little bit.
Yes. Ashley, I love that. The opposite of trauma is presence. Exactly. It's having awareness, and being with it. I love what you're saying about, show yourself compassion and have grace in the moment. Be really gentle with yourself. And I, for me, what I've recognized as I've been exploring and diving into my own trauma story, and I've been on this healing journey. I mean, does it ever end? I don't know, but it has its ebb and flows, and there's that part where you're like, oh, good, I'm past this stuff, or I'm good, I've cleared it out. And then instances come into our lives, right, that draw up and dredge up these wounds that still have been left unresolved or unhealed. And I really began to grow an awareness around that inner critic, that the freaking, shame monster inside, that's like, brush off, get over it, move on, like, come on, but then I'm sitting here and it's like, and I can't move on. I can't move forward. Sometimes you can't see your way through it. And I realized that the way that I was pushing so hard against myself was what was really keeping me stuck. And that the starting point was, just like you said, is to be kind to yourself and really sit in and feel everything, like feel it all. And I realized too that sometimes we might not have the safety or the safe space, right, to really sit through those emotions. And I recognized for myself that had been my story for a very long time, of not having the safe space to do so. And what surprised me is that for the first time, I realized just how genuinely safe I was in my life, because I was able to really be with what was and what was coming up. But it's so easy to judge ourselves, when we're having these trauma responses, and to be like, oh, just get, I should have shown up better. I should have done this. I should have been like this, or I should have, been some sort of other way. But our fear responses are really, like, would you agree that they're really a tool of empowerment? They're the ways of which we're keeping ourselves safe and protecting ourselves.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have developed, so many tools through the years of being able to, in order to keep ourselves safe. Yeah. And, with a trauma response, that's the thing. We have to let ourselves know that in this moment I am safe, and because we go back to the past.
Yeah.
And I think, when the safety piece is so key, absolutely key. And it also has to be safe inside, so maybe we need to ask our inner critic, or I know I have an inner perfectionist or an overachiever, all of those like inner voices. I need to ask them to maybe go play outside for a little bit, so I can allow these emotions to come up so they're not judged.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we dive into that, exploring the emotions that are coming up? Because I didn't, I had someone who had shared with me parts work, which I had never heard before, but I had already, not even knowing that that's what it was, I was already like looking through and feeling into myself, like what was coming up, and sort of giving name to those things. But yeah, I would love to just, like, when it comes to exploring the sides or the aspects, right, that are coming up, and this fragmentation that happens inside of us or has happened inside of us over time, and how we can bring those parts of ourselves, together, consciousness around them, so we can come back together within ourselves.
Right. Yeah. And I know of parts work, but I haven't done a whole lot of work with it.
Yeah.
However, I'm familiar with voice dialogue, which I feel like sounds like
Yep.
it's very similar.
Same lane. Yep. Same lane.
Exactly. Yeah. And so with voice dialogue and possibly with parts work, we have created these protectors within ourselves that their job is to protect, whether you want to say our inner children or different aspects of ourselves within. And, they want to keep at bay anything that might come, might harm us. And so what we want to do is have conversations with these different parts of us to let them know that, well, for one, we want to listen to what they have to tell us, because there's information within us if we're willing to slow down enough in order to listen, and if we're willing to open up that dialogue, whether it's with, a therapist, whether it's with, a friend, whether it's through stream of consciousness writing, journaling, but open up a dialogue to find out, all right, what is it that I need to know, and find out maybe, when did this part of ourselves develop?
Yeah.
And as we build a relationship with all of the aspects of ourselves, that I think is where we can experience a greater level of wholeness rather than internal division.
Right. Right.
I think that's where more healing can take place at that point.
Yeah, I found it really interesting when I would sit with the emotion or that aspect, and I would ask, like, how long has this been with me? How long have you been, and really, and actually talking to, like, it's a person, like, how long have you been hanging out with me? Like, how long have we been, like, and what's your role, right? Like, what are you doing for me? And how can I know that you're here? How can I know when you're showing up? And asking, like, what is it that it wants? Because it's, it was fascinating to understand. And that's where this part around, what is it that you need? Like, there, people, like, there's this conversation about, like, well, what do you need? Like, what do you want? What do you need? Right. And you're like, I don't know. It's like, and it's because we're not sitting right in the shit, honestly, and actually talking to it, because it actually knows what it wants, And so, hi, Eve, you're not late at all. I'm so glad you joined us. But yeah, it's so interesting. And another thing of exploring, like, what's the earliest memory that it's tied to, and that is very, very informing, because what I found is that in exploring those memories, I begin to understand why certain experiences are unfolding, or why the challenge that's coming up is coming up right now, right? And because it's calling for a healing or resolution so often.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think first and foremost, it's calling for our attention.
Yeah.
There's something going on, and there's some part of us that is, asking us to pay attention and to listen. And so often, I know that I'm guilty of this. It's like, I could see the heaviness of the emotion just around the corner, and I'm like, ooh, I'm going to go in this other direction, and I'm going to, distract myself in any way possible, because I don't want to look at it. I don't want to feel it,
Yes.
But, one of the things is, Reverend Shannon O'Hurley, one of my colleagues, she often says, we have to feel it to heal it. Just ignoring the emotion, just ignoring the emotions is not going to make them go away.
Oh.
It's just a matter of, when are we going to invite them in? When are we going to invite them in for a conversation?
And we've talked about that too. It's not about if we're going to do it, like if we're going to face our trauma, it's when we're going to do it, because the longer it takes for you to do it, it just is, it's like, I don't like, I mean, I'm wanting to rewrite the term Pandora's box as I've learned about that story, but it's like you're opening the floodgates, are about to burst open if you compartmentalize and try to store it, in the shadows, right? And it's like, it was never meant, what I'm realizing, it was never meant to be in the darkness. It was never meant to be in the shadow. It was never meant to be seen as this darkness, but rather, integrated, because it was meant to be light. It was meant to inform, for more power, more purpose, more vibrancy.
Totally. Well, that's the thing though. For me, I am a master compartmentalizer.
Oh yeah.
I have learned how to compartmentalize, to the T.
Yeah.
And so, but it's in the emotions sometimes, there have been times over the past couple of years where I've been afraid that if I looked at it, if I touched that wire, I wouldn't know how to turn it off.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know where, is there an end in sight? Because there were times where it felt like I would drown in it if I opened that box.
Oh yeah.
And I think those moments where we need to reach out for support, because we're not on this journey alone.
Yeah.
And if we have even a friend, even just to sit with us, they don't have to say anything, just to sit with us as we process these emotions, that could be huge. That could be literally life-saving. Yeah.
Can we talk about that? The sitting with someone in their pain. I'm really starting to understand that until we do the work for ourselves, it's really hard for us to show up for other people, which is why it's also really important. That's why it's so important to do this work, because, we're all carrying something that, you just can't see the wounds that people are carrying, and it's really hard to show up for people even when we want to, when we're carrying around wounds that we haven't resolved within ourselves.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and there was, a good portion of my life where I believed that being vulnerable was actually a weakness. And so therefore it would prevent me from reaching out for support. It's like, oh, I don't want to bother that person. Oh, I don't want to, and what I've learned and, my growing edge over the last number of years, and my realization is like, oh my God, to be vulnerable, it takes so much courage and so much strength.
So much. So much.
And, for those of us who love supporting other people, when we're willing to also reach out for support when we need it, it gives other people the opportunity to support us in return.
Right. Yeah, I learned, I had this awareness in, and I'm sure for those of you out there who are like highly sensitive, empathic people, right? There's that level of, like, what you're saying is showing up for everyone, and and being independent, and I can take care of it, and I'll help, and I'll, right? And I'm like, it's a trauma response. It is a trauma response. And then this weekend, so I'm in this leadership training, this year-long leadership program that's just, it's blowing my mind. My mentor, Taylor, she's amazing, but she read this beautiful piece, and if I can get it from her, I will share it here on my Facebook page, because I think it's such a profound message. But she talks about the ways of which, when we are being this like hyper vigilant, independent, nature, it's a trauma response. It's the ways of which we've had to armor ourselves up, the ways we've had to protect ourselves, right? Because it wasn't safe. It was not safe to ask for help. It wasn't safe to even say you needed help, right? Because there's not a problem. Because if you bring up a problem, that there's a problem, right? It had some real serious consequences. And so you just had to like carry on, right? And just be with what is. And so I recognize so much how the space of opening has been recognizing the ways of which I armor up, right? Like, what are the trauma responses? And I love how you listed some of those off, like perfectionism, right? The know-it-all, you know, the I got it, I'm good, right?
Overachiever, yeah.
Overachiever. Absolutely. What else?
Oh my gosh.
Please stop. Like, so like humility. Oh no, just no, stop, no. It's all armoring up, right? It's like all the ways that we armor up because we don't want to sit in the fact that we're uncomfortable or meet the moment of something that needs to be expressed or communicated. Eve, let's see, you said, I do find that it brings up more awareness of my own pain and needed healing when I show up for another person's pain, however. Yeah. Sometimes showing up with another person can help us explore our own pain, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. And oftentimes, the people who are attracted to us, oftentimes have similar stuff.
Yes.
Have similar experiences. And so they become a mirror for us. And so we can support them where they are, but at the same time, we might want to be making, a mental note for, ourselves to come back later to our own, advice or homework or, insights.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's easier to support somebody else and see, what some possible next steps are for them before we see it for ourselves.
Yes.
But I think I know that piece that you're talking about as far as the trauma response. I read something last fall talking about ultra independence as a trauma response.
Yes.
And basically, it's based in lack of being able to trust other people.
Yes.
Because we're constantly let down. And then it goes back to safety.
Yeah.
And it's like, never mind, I will do it myself because then I know that I'm safe.
Yeah.
And I can totally relate to that.
Yeah. That compassion piece is huge. We talked about, and I know when we first were going down this thread of, uncovering this topic, we talked a lot about sexual assault. And, even when I think about the microaggressions that occur, in our society, I could speak to that as a queer, BIPOC, woman, right? But the ways in which microaggressions show up in our world, in our society, the ways we interact all the time, it's like just our trauma just constantly being hit up against something, right? So when it comes to healing from like really deep, like traumatic memories, right? And how they've been repressed because we kind of have to, but then we're walking around in life and you're engaging these like microaggressions, these subtle ways of harassment, right? How, I'm curious if you have any insight or wisdom to share around how you can allow yourself the compassion, right, to respond what feels authentic rather than just sort of stifling it down, right, and moving forward.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I often, in order to keep myself safe, I often don't respond. And so I'll just keep coping. However, other people might be in a different space and be ready to respond, and there's a difference between a reaction and a response, because if we just react to what's, happening, the other person, or, in the situation that we're in, there might not be a space for hearing, to hear what's being said, because there's so much emotion from that reaction. But if we're able to calm ourselves down, calm our nervous system down enough so that we can respond, perhaps the situation from that space, the other person or other people will be able to hear us, when we respond with, you know what, I'm not okay with that. You know what, this is, here's my boundary, and here's what I'm willing to do. And I think the bigger piece for me is, and maybe for other people is, or part of the work is building that muscle of self-care and self-love.
Yes.
And I think as we love ourselves more, maybe we're more willing to, establish a healthier boundary than we did even yesterday.
Yeah. Can you explain more around self-love? Because this is the thing, I was like, oh, self-love, you got to love yourself. But what does that mean? How do you really put self-love into practice?
Excellent question. I mean, first, it's what are some things that nurture you? So that would be my homework assignment for people. So write down a list of maybe 10 things that you like to do that fills your cup. Because so oftentimes, again, those of us who love to be in service and love to give and give and give, we often deplete ourselves. We empty out our cup, but then we're not going to be, available for the next person. So what if instead of, giving until depletion, what if we give from the overflow and we love from the overflow? And so that means we have to constantly be refilling our cup. And so that could be, lighting a candle for yourself. It could be taking a bath. It could be reading a inspirational book or watching your favorite movie. Whatever the things are that that nurture you, that feel good for you, really. But the other piece of it too is to be paying attention to our inner conversation, and noticing when maybe we have some old beliefs or negative, comments, towards ourselves. And like you were saying earlier, try to rewrite that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love doing is writing affirmations on my mirror.
Yes.
So I can read it to myself every day,
Yes.
And just as a reminder.
Yes. When it comes to this, for the self-love part that you're talking about, it's, I would always go back to that reparenting inner child work. And I'm curious, because this is something I've been exploring, because I've been hearing these two terms interchange, ego and the inner child, and putting them in the same lane, but I don't think they're the same.
I don't think they're the same.
How could you differentiate what they are? If it's inner child or ego, that's,
in the moment, how do you differentiate?
Yeah, I'm just what is that?
I mean, first it's about sitting with it and asking yourself that question.
Yeah.
But I think ego is, it is that self-identity, piece. It's that core, essence of who we are. And okay, mind you, our goal is not to get rid of the ego.
Right.
Some people are like, oh my God, we got to demolish it. And
no,
our goal is not to get rid of the ego.
I'm learning that it's supposed to be a servant. Yeah.
Right. How can we use the ego and use the insights from the ego to support us in our life, and to empower us. But the key is also that we don't want the ego to be in the driver's seat of our life.
Right. Right.
So
yeah.
We also don't want an inner child in the driver's seat. So one thing that you can do in the moment is, if you have a response, you can say, all right, how old is this, this response right now?
Yeah.
And that first number that comes to mind, is that's what it is. And it's more than likely it's an inner child, who's trying to get your attention.
Okay. Interesting. I guess it would be more in truth, probably, like expressing itself more as truth, whereas the ego, I think, is more like it's because it's operating out of that fear place. It's often like tearing you down rather than coming from that clarity. Yeah, I had a friend who had shared her perspective, and I'm like, I think that's probably more what it feels like. But it's really interesting to explore the ways that those things come up, and like what's coming from ego, what's coming from like the part of me that's true, that needs that nourishment, or needs to be connected with. When we were discussing this topic, one of the things we spoke about was around suicide, and how so often, especially when we're alone, and maybe it's because it's not a topic or a subject that we really talk openly about. It's like the thing that nobody wants to talk about. That you feel like oh my, like it's this big thing, and it feels overwhelming, and it also, there's a lot of shame around it. But I really loved what you were saying about it's really common, it's really typical. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit more on this piece around suicide and when we find ourselves in that darkness, because, I recently found myself there, and I really had to pull deep, right, to come through that. But, it's like we're not alone in those moments, but we feel like we are. So yeah, I'd love to hear your wisdom on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of the topics you bring up, both suicide as well as sexual assault, sexual abuse, are those taboo topics that nobody wants to talk about.
Right.
And yet, I think that they're so important to talk about,
right,
because it happens so often. And again, we're not alone. And the more we talk about it, and the more we're willing to share about it, hopefully the stigma will go away, or reduce in some way, and then more people will be willing to share. But as far as suicide, oh my goodness, I've had personal experience with suicide on many levels. For myself, being suicidal first at the age of 12, and I've had family members who've been suicidal. I've had people around me who've died by suicide. And that darkness that you mentioned, I mean, it's real. And I feel like unless somebody has experienced that darkness, they don't fully understand, and I think that often brings in some of the stigma, as far as, people, will add shame to the mix. And I mean, there are people who they change a death certificate in order to, take off any connection to suicide. But the reality is, for me at least, is there were times in my life where I felt that I didn't have any other way to, to move on. I could not handle the pain, the weight any longer. And the only thing that I can think of, my only solution was to just end it all.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was heavy and dark and scary. But the thing with when people experience suicidal thoughts, one of the things to remember is that whatever is happening right now is just temporary.
Right.
And the act of suicide is a permanent solution for a temporary situation.
Yeah.
But when we're in that darkness, when we're faced to it, that wall of darkness, I mean, that's all you can see, because it's almost like tunnel vision. It's like, I can't see beyond it.
Yeah.
But it's in those moments where we have to take a step back. If we're able to take a step back, perhaps we could see around that wall. Perhaps we could see a little bit of light, you know, perhaps we're able to reach out, you know, for support. There are so many people who are willing to support us. And if it's not, you know, our immediate family or close friends, find somebody else. Find somebody who's willing to sit with you and to listen. Yeah, absolutely. You know, you don't have to go through whatever the situation is by yourself. And I know that it feels overwhelming. You know, and for me, I felt like the last time, which was, you know, a few years ago, where the thoughts of suicide came in again, it was just this dark time of my life. And I felt like I was, you know, walking into the ocean, and I was being pummeled by the waves, and I couldn't find my ground. It's like, which way is up?
You
know? And so, and that's in that moment, it's like, okay, I don't know where to go from here. I have to reach out.
I think one of the most fascinating things about trauma, and one of the ways to really access where you are in the wisdom part, is like to go to your body. There's this book called The Body Keeps the Score. And I'll be honest, it's a little heady, like it's a little there's a lot but it's really diving into the wisdom of the body and how it carries the memory, even if we can't remember like what happened, like our body is carrying the memory.
Absolutely.
And it's so much of what we respond out of in those, when we're reacting, like you said, rather than responding. But if we can go to our body, we can actually learn how to respond differently.
Right. And we can release those memories so our body doesn't have to carry them anymore. You know, and I mean, I've been on my, you know, healing journey from childhood sexual abuse for 30 years now. And where I am on my journey now is, okay, where am I holding it in my body? I've done so much, you know, therapy and, you know, all sorts of classes, but now it's about getting in touch with my body. And it's about, for me, it's about reclaiming my body.
Yes. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, and that's both exciting and terrifying at the same time, because now back to your Pandora's box, now I'm like, oh God, now what am I going to unearth as I, you know, tap into this very different layer of healing? So, but yeah, we have to get to the body level, because that's, the memories are stored there. It's in our cellular memory.
I'm finding healing when it comes to like really exploring healing. It's to look at all these different modalities. Like talk therapy is one way, which is really great, but it doesn't quite get you to access like what's happening somatically. So doing things that have to do with energy work and things that have to do with like actually working and connecting with your body through a physical nature. Like in the program that I'm in is very yoga based, and I did not realize, I mean, people talk about all the time, like yoga's changed my life, but it's like, it literally has that transformative effect because you're accessing your body in ways that maybe you had been repressing or suppressing or not engaging with it. So you can release those emotions with an awareness around it. And it's been really fascinating to watch and understand the importance of somatic work with the body, and how healing is like, it has several different lenses and lanes that we should be exploring, rather than this one way. Because you are a reverend at Mile High Church, I want to dive into this soulful plane of our trauma and our wounds, right? And how this really connects to like soul purpose. What is the importance about trauma around understanding our soul purpose here? What do you think?
Well, I personally believe that, I believe that everything happens for a reason. And so for me and my journey, what I recognized, even in high school, was that, for one, the family abuse that I experienced, okay, it ends with me.
Yeah.
And how can I use my experience to support other people?
Yes.
And so I knew that, and not to condone the abuse that I experienced,
Yeah.
but how can I use it to help transform, not only transform myself, but ultimately transform, the world,
Yeah.
simply by being willing to talk about it, and having a voice. And because there's one thing about, for those people who are have textbook knowledge about abuse, but for
Mm-hmm.
me there was a difference when I had a therapist or a friend who had personal experience, because the level of relating was so different,
Mm-hmm.
and the empathy. But I think our sole purpose, if you look at the big key events in your life, I wonder if, there might be a glimmer of resonance of, I need to be paying attention to this a little bit more. Like, so for me, some of my key pieces in early childhood, or not early childhood, but my younger life, was sexual abuse, so incest. I'm a teen mom, so I had my son when I was in
Right.
a junior in high school, and then
Yeah.
also suicide. So those three are big pieces,
Huge.
and I'm willing to talk about any of them.
Right. Right.
Because it's in that opening, in that sharing, in that talking, that I feel it gives other people permission to look at their own experience and hopefully be willing to continue on their healing journey.
Right. Yeah, it's in sharing our pain and sharing our wounds. You're exactly right, and that has to do with that. It's like almost like you learn courage through vulnerability, right?
Yes.
I mean, because it takes courage to be vulnerable, but it's almost like you don't quite access that courage until you dive into being vulnerable. It's so interesting, and how that does help us become leaders, or to see ourselves as the leaders that we are. And I'm really learning that right now, is that, like, we're always leading where we are, whether we like it or not. Right. And so much of that is our story of what we've gone through, what we've experienced, that gives us the wisdom, and that wisdom is important. It's like it's healing balm, right? That we can share with other people, but it does take that courage to do so. And to talk about the things that people don't want to talk about, or that are hard to talk about, which you have to engage with all the time, in the work that you do.
Yeah, I think the wisdom that we learn through our healing journey becomes the medicine for others.
Yeah.
That healing medicine. And again, the medicine could be as simple as sitting with someone who's in pain, who's in the midst of their emotions, or this change in their life, and to listen. We don't have to give advice, we don't have to hand them a tissue, just let them be in it. Because when we feel into our emotions, when we allow the emotions to surface, there's wisdom within the emotions that we can only access when we allow them to come to the surface. And when we feel into them, we have to be able to move through them. The illusion is that we're going to go around our emotions, but we move through them. We listen to what the wisdom is that they've came up to share with us, and then they dissipate. But the fear is that we're going to drown in them.
Yes. It feels overwhelming. Like it feels overwhelming. And to be in all honesty, I'm a Sagittarius, I'm a fire sign. Like, I'm like, all right, we're showing up, you know, and it's like not too emotional, really. I mean, I got some water and some of my other signs, but you know, it's like I was not an emotional person. I realized that was a trauma response. And
Right.
whereas now I'm really accessing these deep emotions, and it's like you get afraid that you're like, I'm just gonna cry for hours on end and it's never gonna end.
Totally.
But it does have an end. But you only
Right.
get there if you actually allow yourself, right, to be with the emotions that are coming up.
Right. Right. So that's why it takes courage to even sit with the emotion.
Yes,
To
yeah,
bring them to the table.
exactly. Yeah, it's so scary. It can be so scary, but it's like it's so transformative and transcendent on the other side of it. I want to talk a little bit about what you had mentioned too, as far as the healing, the even like ancestrally, even, right? Like there's transgenerational wounds.
Mm-hmm.
This is a conversation that so for me, I've come from a sexual abuse, physical abuse, narcissistic abuse, and yeah, just having had a lot of trauma in my past.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized for me when we're talking about this piece about self-love, I
Mm-hmm.
realized that like so many of the women in my family, on my mother's side, passed very early, like what you would say would be too soon, right? Although there's not a timeline,
Sure.
you know, it's our own judgment, but you know what we would say was too soon, and I had to explore. And when I asked, you know, why, like what is the thread, it was about the fact that they weren't allowed the capacity and the space to love themselves, to choose themselves, to operate in their lives authentically for themselves, to uproot their own trauma. And I realized how their trauma was impressing upon me my trauma, right? It was this cycle of abuse that was carried over, and it was about me breaking the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And how many of you who are watching this, right, whether you're catching us on the replay or watching us with us live right now, and you are like diving into this thing around trauma because you recognize there's been a pattern or a cycle, and you're starting to understand yourself as the cycle breaker,
Mm-hmm.
right? I would love to hear you speak about this this topic, this subject around ancestral trauma and these transgenerational lines of trauma, and how they're part of this experience with our soul.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I mean, I
Yeah.
started exploring transgenerational trauma, my goodness, I think 16, 17 years ago during my undergrad, because in one of my classes, I did a genogram of different aspects within my family. And what I realized is that at least the last 3 generations of women in my family have all experienced some form of trauma that
Mm.
was transferred to the next generation. Because one of the things, my theory is that generations before us, it wasn't really common for people to do the healing work that we're able to do today. You
Mm-hmm.
know, to
Mm-hmm.
go to a therapist, you know, thinking about my mom when she was a young girl, I don't even know what there were, you know, for healing work.
Mm-hmm.
And it was common to just bury it. Okay, that happened in the past. We're going to close the door and we're going to move on, you know? And so, and then here comes our generation, and here comes, you know, the warriors, and we're like, okay, it ends here. We're not
Yeah.
doing this anymore. And what is it going to take? You know, and what do I have to do? Because I know that's what I came here for. One of the things that I came here for was to break that pattern, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've also had to remind myself is to be gentle with, even energetically, even in thinking about them, be gentle with the women before me, because they did the best that they could.
Yes.
You know, at that
Yes.
time, they didn't have any other alternatives, you know, that I have today. They didn't have
Yeah.
the resources that I have today.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, because they didn't heal their trauma, that's why it was passed down, is my theory. You know, and so it's,
Mm-hmm.
again, it goes back to,
I
it's
would
in our
agree.
cells, it's in our
Yeah.
DNA.
Yeah.
And so we have to unravel it. We have to let it out. We have to release it. You know, and back to, you know, the somatic work that you were talking about earlier. For me in this moment, yoga is a little too slow for me. However, but I've gotten into kickboxing.
Ooh.
You know? And even the first few minutes of, you know, punching this bag, and I could feel the emotions coming up, and I'm like, no, we're not gonna go to the, you know, but why not? Just let it all flow.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to access them so we can release them.
Mm-hmm.
You know? But back to transgenerational trauma, I mean, I think that's one of the things that our country is experiencing and being awakened to in a bigger way now. You know, whether it's, you know, various the Me Too movement, whether it's you know, other forms of trauma that, you know, people have experienced through the generations, that is still here. It's still, you can still feel it.
Yes.
You know, and how do we access it so that it can be released? Part of it is being willing to look at it, you know, being willing to name it.
Yes. Being willing to name it. And sometimes it can be scary to name it, but man, is it so healing to name it, for sure.
Totally. Well, once you name it, you can see it for what it is, and then you can be guided to your next step. But if you're not willing to name it, it's just this, you know, monster, you know, this emotion that doesn't have form to it. You know, and when we're able to bring a little bit more form to it, then we can, you know, continue on the healing journey. But I think, you know, what we're doing too is not only are we doing our personal healing work, but in our own individual personal healing work, it also feeds into the collective.
Yes.
You know, the collective evolution, the collective healing.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I, you know, when I did my talk, my TEDx talk, when I closed out on that talk was about the fact that you're the healing that you seek, you're the freedom that you seek, you're the change, right, that you want to see in the world. That's you. And the only way you get there is by actually doing the work to heal, you know, the things that are out of alignment or with you. It's about loving the things that you have found unlovable about yourself first. You know, it's when we love the things that we find unlovable. It's when we do the healing work of excavating and dismantling that inner oppression, that we that's where we change and shift the oppressive nature of the world around us. I wonder for you how it feels. Like I've seen a few posts from people who are like, you know, this bad thing's happening, this bad thing's happening, this person's doing this, that person's doing this, you know, and then like, you know, obviously there's no God, obviously there's nothing happening here, you know, like what's going on? And I'm like, it's like, look in the mirror, you know, like what are you like, first and foremost, like, you don't even have to have a conversation about God, but like, how are you showing up anti that, right? Are you just complaining about it? Or are you actually being the change, right? Like, if you're mad because people are not being kind or compassionate or caring or giving, right? Are you being compassionate? Are you being kind? Are you being giving? Are you being caring? You want peace in the world? Do you have peace inside of yourself?
Absolutely.
Perhaps.
The question is constantly, you know, why isn't God doing something about this? Whatever this is.
Yeah.
It's like, hello, God sent you. Exactly. You know? And it's like,
what are you
we're
here
the
for?
ones. Yeah, and we're the ones that we've been waiting for. Are we willing to step up?
Yeah.
That's part of the question. Or are we gonna, wait for somebody else to step up?
Exactly. Yeah. And I realize how long, and me too. I understand. Like, I have to look at myself, right, on the ways that I had been sitting back, right?
Right.
And it is it is this courage of doing this emotional work that is the healing balm. It's like that. It's like sitting back and being like, I'm just gonna choose to like live with rose-colored glasses and idealize and not be in the truth of what is, right? And it's only been in meeting it that I really understand, like, man, I'm more compassionate, I'm more caring, I'm more loving, I'm more heart opened, I'm more present, I have more resources to show up for other people and other things. But it all comes from doing it here.
Right. You have to first be willing to show up for yourself if you're ever going to be able to show up for somebody else.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's doing our work, but it's also and sitting in the question. So we can see, something outside of us or around us that is painful, is hurtful, and we want to do something. And then it comes back to sitting, pausing. And it's like, okay, what's mine to do in this situation? Again, so we can come from a space of responding rather than reacting from that emotional space. What's mine to do in this situation? And then just listen.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here with me, Reverend Michelle Scavetta. It's so wonderful to have you here as a guest on the show. How can people connect with you and the work you're doing? I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, you can find me on Instagram as well as Facebook, and you can always email me, mscavetta@milehighchurch.org. And what I have coming up next month is actually I'm going to be leading a Transcending Trauma workshop, a 4-week workshop online. So if anybody is interested in, doing some more work with other women, this is going to be a women's only group. They can go to milehighchurch.org and sign up for the class there.
Awesome. Just lovely to dive into this conversation with you. For those of you who are listening and for those of you who catch us on the replay, I hope that this conversation served you tonight. And if anything, what we hope is that you understand the courage of vulnerability and showing up for yourself, having compassion and grace and kindness for yourself, and understanding that your trauma and your wounds, like, they hold the wisdom and the healing for you, for your potential, as we were talking earlier, right? For your tapping into your potential, understanding your purpose, uncovering your true, authentic self. It's all there within that. And if you have any questions or you want to reach out, definitely connect with Reverend Michelle Scavetta. Also check out Mile High Church. It's an amazing community that's interfaith and open to all. And yeah, take care of yourselves and go gently forward, and do the brave work, and get in touch with your body and yourself. It's the most important work you can do, really.
And don't forget to reach out. If you need additional support at any moment, there is an ocean of support around you.
Yes, including pillars right here.
Let's talk.
Anything else you want to leave with our listeners tonight before we close out?
Yeah, just like you said, just be gentle with yourself and just one foot in front of the other. We don't need to do leaps and bounds right now. It's just, what's the next step? What's the next step on my healing journey?
Yes. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Have a great week. Thanks for joining us. And if you want to catch us on the replay, and you can always find this episode on our YouTube channel, Meant for More. You can find us on YouTube and check out the other episodes there. Some really great conversations, a lot of deep wisdom shared there for you to connect with. Have a great week, everyone, and we will talk to you on the next episode. Bye.